for sure, a lot of regulation is lobbied by existing players to make sure that they create a kind of stability in the market. But if you take that the regulation as a starting point to define your value proposition, then you have really a way to force you into the market.
Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of our Fireside chat and our podcast. My name is Axel Funhoff. I'm the General Director at the Verhaert Group, and I'm here with the person who is probably most well known in Belgium in the innovation service sector, Koen Verhaert. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Axel. Pleasure to join you in this session.
Yeah, I mean, you are one of the most experienced people in this sector, and I'm pretty sure you're the most well-known one in Belgium in this sector. You have over 3 decades of experience in innovation service provision and in basically being the outsourced development department of our clients. So I was just wondering, as a first question, from your 3 decades of experience in the sector, what would you say you have learned which would have surprised you in the early days of your career?
Oh, Axel, what a question and what an introduction. Huh? This is really a start of a fire chat. You immediately put the fire on.
Indeed.
Indeed, we talk about some years ago. Huh? I think when I entered the business in those days, there was already a kind of agreement or a consensus that innovation was more than just an engineering exercise or a marketing trick or something created by the designer. But however, although it was clear that it was more than that, it was still a little bit vague on what that meant. For sure, everybody saw that the conclusion of that observation was that we were talking about a process in which technology plays an important role, in which design plays an important role, or user centricity, and in which you have, of course, a business that takes its position. And in fact, what really surprised me was the inherent complexity that goes with that.
Yeah, sure.
And to be honest, I still have the impression that we still struggle with that complexity, and that this complexity tends to increase over the years.
Of course.
Partially due to the fact that of course the technology component gets more complex, more multidisciplinary, more integrated. Technology disciplines get connected to each other. But also in terms of this usability aspect, where we think much more into code development scenarios, where innovation is no longer a kind of vertical activity in a company, but a horizontal one. So a lot of interactions into the process that, of course, is great, but also creates a complexity. And in fact, it's only when it became a little bit sharper to me, clear to me, what this is all about and how those different, let's say, 3 disciplines get together, that I felt in the right position to advise our customers on that. I think the whole clue or the basic insight was that there's kind of a relationship between those disciplines. Not a relationship in terms of a hierarchy or a priority, but they're one way or another, they play a game together. And this game means that for me that it's a user driven process. That's the main driver.
Right.
It's for sure technology enabled. So technology is key to get those things done.
Yeah.
And it should be business focused.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we have to create business for the initiative taker of innovation, of course, also the complete chain that comes behind it.
So those are the three disciplines. So it's the usability, the technology enablement, and the business validation.
Yes, and again, they have a relation to each other.
Yes.
And the nice thing is that typically you have companies that are a little bit more market driven or technology driven,
Yeah.
and which is a little bit Mars and the Moon, and you get them together with this idea of user centricity,
Right.
as the main driver of the process. So that's for me the glue.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I came to that conclusion has a lot to do with the core idea, the core ambition of innovation, and that's about creating added value.
Right. Sure.
It makes no sense to develop a new product or a new service if it does not contribute something to, let's say, the world and our economic system.
Yeah.
So it's about added value, and if you look into added value, then you come to the conclusion rapidly that added value comes from a kind of combination of two things: new qualities or wanted effects
Yeah.
in an ID, and disadvantages or unwanted effects.
Indeed.
And it's only when there's kind of balance between those two that you have added value.
And when
if
the
you-
advantages overweigh the disadvantages that you automatically create. with it,
Exactly,
of course.
automatically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And typically we have a little bit, and I think that's even cultural, we have the tendency to focus on the advantages, and we tend to forget the disadvantages.
Right.
eh?
And can you give an example of that, where like an obvious product where
Well-
the innovation has actually also brought disadvantages? With
Well,
it?
a very typical disadvantage is, of course, always cost.
Yeah.
Almost any quality or feature that you add has a cost.
Right.
But of course, this disadvantage can also be situated in complexity for the user, or complexity in the implementability, or whatever.
Yes.
And so it's always about this balance. And if you further dig into this concept of added value, then we found out that there are in fact only a few important drivers to that. And it's first of all, we believe very much that a product, whether it's a digital product or a hardware product or a service, it needs to have a kind of purpose, a kind of meaning.
Yeah.
It has to solve something. And of course, the problem that it solves can also be an emotional problem,
Yeah,
to be clear.
sure.
But
Of course.
it should solve something.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's something like usability. You have to be able to use it. And then it should be desirable.
Indeed.
And now we already talk about three elements which are clearly user-driven.
Indeed.
And of course, once you cover that, you have issues of feasibility and viability, which are key. And there's something like allowance. There's regulation, there are policies, whatever, that also limits you. And in fact, those 5 elements are for us the key drivers for added value. And if you look into them, then of course it becomes also clear that by definition we talk about a very integrated, multidisciplinary effort.
Indeed. Indeed. Very interesting. So let's maybe zoom in on the great innovations that we have seen in the last, say, few decades. And let's maybe start from an engineering perspective. When you engineer something new, then the traditional engineering discipline very early emphasized on quite a rigid specification management. Now, you have argued before that very rigid specifications management can also stifle innovation. If you look at the innovations dilemma, how do you think that specifications management can be managed more dynamically so that we are not sort of anticipating the exact features and requirements of a product before we even start an innovation trajectory? So how can we potentially open up the knowledge that the engineering discipline brings with it in terms of specifications management, how can we open it up to a much wider and opener innovation process?
Yes. But I think first of all, it's important to realize, I guess, that the reason why we always have the tendency to specify whatever we can specify is based on the assumption that we create a kind of control over the process by specifying it.
Yeah.
It's to get grip on
Indeed.
what we're doing, and this is a little bit a false assumption, I'm afraid. It's by doing so we are not getting control on the process. We are just limiting ourselves in solving the problem that should be solved.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that I think there are few reasons why this is a little bit a wrong reflex.
Interesting.
If you look to innovation, then I think we all agree that that the basic model behind it is a funnel.
Mm-hmm.
A funnel where you have a lot of input ideas in the beginning and hopefully that successful product or service at the end. And the quality is in managing that funnel. And typically, if you specify from day one whatever you can specify, then you create a tendency to close this funnel as early as possible.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you end up in a process which is not a creative, not really a creative value-adding process, but a kind of problem-solving process.
Right. Yes.
In a very narrow context. So I think that's one of the key problems. Second major issue is that if our aim is to create added value, and like I said, the components of added value, then you see that those things are interlinked with each other. And that means that you can perfectly distress a little bit on one specification if you overperform in the other one.
Right. Yes.
Again, one of the unwanted effects is most cases cost. Well, you can increase the performance of certain features a bit, and by doing so, perhaps the cost goes a little bit up. But at the end of the day, you can have created added value. So there's nothing wrong with that. So let's take a very simple product as an example, a chair.
Yeah.
We have been talking about those different components of added value. If you reflect that on a chair, then the meaning of a chair is clear. It's to sit on it, and it makes sense because as humans we have to sit frequently. We're not made to walk around the whole day. For sure, the utility is an issue. There's and then we talk about comfort, and ergonomics, things like that. Desirability is in general about design, and sure, it has to be strong enough. So there's a feasibility thing, and there are even some regulations, fire protection or whatever, linked to it. Of course, if you start designing a chair, then it's perfectly allowed to be a little bit more, for example, a little more heavier chair, which is a disadvantage, as long as you have also comfort.
Indeed.
So there are all kind of simple things that are connected to each other, and you have to evaluate it as a total and not as a limitative specification as you typically do in specification management.
Yeah, indeed. And so you are basically advocating for being relative. Is that true? You're advocating being more limited on specifications, but to allow for discoveries during the innovation process and potentially move into a slightly different direction than you had in mind originally?
Yes, I think the essence is that the focus should not be on meeting specifications. The focus should be on creating value add.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, the whole idea is that you specify in function of the value add. And therefore, it's, I think, very important that everybody knows, if you write down specifications, that everybody knows why those specifications are on that piece of paper, how they contribute to the value add.
Yeah.
And it means also that at a certain point in time, you can start discussing whether this specification is still the right one, still valid.
Yeah, indeed. Maybe if I just may ask a little bit, drill a little bit deeper. What we of course get from our clients very often is a relatively specific description of how the outcome should look like. Also, what the price of the outcome should look like. It's probably frightening them if you suggest to them to open up the process a little bit, because they may think that the budget may also be at danger. What would be the argument that you could put against it?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I don't think it makes sense to argue upfront too much on that.
Right.
I think you have to argue on that at the moment that that you see the potential to create more added value.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And if there is a specification that stands in the way to create more added value, then you have to discuss that, and then typically people will agree and will leave the dogma of the specification.
Very interesting. You also mentioned regulation, obviously. Now, I think creative minds see regulation very often as a limiting factor, but you also, I think, argue that regulation can be a driver for innovation, which is quite intriguing, of course. Can you maybe give examples where you can think of where regulation has actually really driven innovation such that we now talk about more of an innovation level playing field, or that really surprisingly smart products came out of regulation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the fact that it's perceived as being limitative is in fact only because we address it too late in the process.
Right.
In any creative process, you have a blank sheet on day one, and you have the full creative space to solve a problem. At the end of the day, at the end of the process, you're very, very limited. Meaning that if you start addressing compliance issues at the end of a process, then by definition it feels very limited.
Yeah, of course.
So it's just the whole problem is the way we look at it. Just to illustrate a little bit also the potential of it, we have the pleasure with Verhaert to be one of the investors in an early stage fund.
Yes.
In partnership with IMEC.
Yeah, indeed.
It's called the iStart funds. Today we have about 250 startups in that portfolio. And in fact, every quarter we join the investment committee and we evaluate about 25 new startup dossiers.
Indeed.
And it's based on an open call system. It's very funny to see if in the months before there has been a kind of discussion in media on new regulation, then you can be sure that in the next call you will have startups that are addressing this new regulation. For example, last year there was a lot of discussion regarding to ESG reporting.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
And then suddenly you see a lot of startup software companies that come up with new solutions to manage that reporting challenge. And again, I will give an example that is very a little bit consumer related and simple product because it's very known by everybody. But this morning, I wake up on the radio, on the news, with a story that there's a regulation on or a lot of regulation on the source of ingredients for food. Gets tougher and tougher.
Right. Yeah.
The discussion was on chocolate, and there has been kind of review on all the chocolate producers on how they perform in terms of the origin of the cacao.
Interesting. Yeah.
The leading company in that is a Dutch startup, Tony.
Yeah, oh, well, yeah, of course, very well known.
It's a very popular, recent
Indeed.
Brand in chocolate.
Indeed.
That took this regulation and the sensitivity that is linked to it as the core value of their product, and they outcompeted the whole industry. So for sure, a lot of regulation is lobbied by existing players to make sure that they create a kind of stability in the market. But if you take that the regulation as a starting point to define your value proposition, then you have really a way to force you into the market.
That's very, very interesting. I can also think of other regulations. So, for example, the right to repair in Europe. So some phone companies are starting with you can absolutely repair and exchange components.
Yeah.
If you think of the Cyber Resilience Act, imagine that you develop a connected device with the promise that it's absolutely hack-free and that you do everything to make sure that the data do not leak. Indeed, that could really be a differentiating factor as of the beginning. Very interesting. Now, another question. When we talked earlier, you basically proposed that there are only 5 ways to create value through innovation, based on understanding the wanted and the unwanted effect.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate more on these 5 different strategies of innovation and how they would differ in their approach to create value add?
Yeah. Yes, it sounds a little bit oversimplified, of course, the claim that there are only 5 strategies. But of course, starting from the idea that indeed it's about a strategy to create added value, and this is based on those 2 elements, unwanted and wanted effects, then your strategy should be about creating a kind of mix between those 2 elements. To make it not too abstract, let's start from the simple idea that this unwanted effect, it's about price, and the wanted effect is about a new performance. But again, those unwanted effects can be from a completely different category than cost, but just for the sake of the reasoning. For sure, you can have a strategy to keep the price the same.
Indeed, yeah.
The target price, and to make a little bit a better product, which is a very straightforward incremental strategy that still makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases.
Yes.
You can also do the other way around. You can try to make it a little bit cheaper and offering the same performance. It's also an incremental thing, I think. And of course, if you have those 2 options, you also have the third option, and that's to make something and cheaper and better. And then you feel already that and cheaper and better. That's probably very doable in, let's say, immature products, where there's still a lot of space to improve.
Yeah, where you industrialize it and just use economies of scale and so on.
Clearly, when you really get into a mature product, then that becomes challenging.
Of course.
And then the only way to do that is to do something radically different. I think that remains a very important source of radical innovation. It's breaking one way or another the logic between those wanted and unwanted effects.
That would be disruptive innovation, even, wouldn't it?
Well, disruptive is I think is perhaps the 4th strategy.
Okay.
And typically in disruption, you make something which is of less quality in terms of performance, but also if we focus again on cost price, less expensive. Let's say what Ryanair did 20 years ago in their industry. For sure, they made a service which is less performant than the high-end airlines, but for completely different price.
Yes, sure.
That's disruption.
Okay. And so, for example, Uber replacing the traditional taxi market would be radical in innovation in your view. It's cheaper and better, basically.
Yes.
That's
indeed.
radical innovation.
Indeed.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So there's just a few things we can play with, and I think the whole challenge is to choose something.
Yeah, indeed.
And then preferably to stick to it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, Koen, that there is still another factor of innovation, maybe another form of incremental innovation. Can you elaborate on that, where you really increase the performance but significantly and the price only incrementally?
Yes, indeed. It's like you said, if we really look to all the possibilities in making balances between those disadvantages and advantages, then indeed there is, of course, also the possibility to make it a little bit more expensive, but also to add some new qualities, or to invest, let's say, some product cost in new qualities. And I think if you really think it through, then you will agree that are the 5 options, and we just have to play with them.
And maybe the general car industry follows that. So the prices go up like every year a little bit, but the functionality really improves significantly. I mean, 30 years ago, cars regularly didn't have air conditionings.
Yes.
They now only burn half of the fuel. And maybe that's an example of this other incremental.
Absolutely. And I think it's a nice example in that sense that typically you have the life cycle of a product category. And in the beginning, it's very easy to address also those disadvantages and also to find new features. And once a product becomes more mature, this becomes more and more complex, and then you start adding more cost for a little bit of added value or new features. And at a certain point, you come to a scenario in which you're really at the limit. There's more cost than there is quality, and then you create kind of negative added value, and that's the moment that you get disrupted.
Yes, and where really radical innovation is necessary, or disruptive innovation could be necessary. Very interesting. So of course, it's clear that innovation has to be technology enabled to some extent. Usually it's technology enabled. You were suggesting earlier when we talked that the classical technology readiness levels, the classical TRL model, which is widely adopted in the engineering industry, is very often misleading us to address the innovation gap. So the technology readiness level methodology comes from NASA from the 60s or 70s or 60s probably, and is now widely adopted in the industry. Can you elaborate why this could actually be a limiting factor and how we could potentially overcome it in innovation going forward?
Yes, well, let's be clear. There's nothing wrong with the TRL concept, or at least in the vision or for the purpose of NASA. NASA developed this concept in the view of a mission, let's say, to go to the moon.
Indeed.
So it's a little bit. It's a project, if you want. One objective, we go to the moon, and we have to develop technologies and build systems based on those technologies to get something which is reliable enough to get to the moon.
Yeah.
And in that context, it's indeed very important to make sure that you start developing systems based on technologies that have the same maturity.
Yes, indeed.
If not, you launch your rocket with all kind of mature technologies into the system, except one.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, that's then the failure.
Exactly.
So managing this TRL framework is key to manage the risk in your project. Having said that, we see nowadays, and this is something that has a little bit evolved over the last, I think, 10 years, suddenly, for one reason or another, Europe has identified this TRL framework as a concept to define innovation policies.
Right.
And all the local governments have been taking over this concept. And I think there's a misunderstanding behind that, in that sense that this TRL concept was designed to go to the moon,
right?
To have this project objective. And of course, if you talk about creating a policy and creating an ecosystem in a country to bring forward innovation, that's something very different than managing a project.
Yes, indeed.
And the whole problem with that is that this TRL system is a concept in which you create a linear line of thinking towards your first step on the moon.
Uh-huh.
So you put technology development and product development in a consecutive way, and there something goes wrong in that sense that they both have a very different timeline. Technology development is something that typically is about it takes 5 to 10 years to get a technology right. Product development, depending whether it's a system innovation or an application innovation, is between let's say a year and 2-3 years to get to the market.
Yeah.
Of course, if we do that consecutive, then we have a very slow process.
Indeed.
But I think the whole issue is also that technology development and the maturity of technology is depending on the application where you want to integrate it.
Yeah.
And typically you see that technology development nowadays starts from a kind of lead application, kind of vision on where we want to implement such technology for. And typically such a lead application is or should be a very demanding application area for that type of technology. For example, in speech recognition.
Right. Yeah.
When we started to develop speech recognition, the whole idea was to develop a technology for very, very complex human interfaces.
Yes, indeed.
Think about pilots
Yeah.
in the cockpit,
Yeah.
or the surgery room, or the type of applications.
Yeah.
Because of course that's very demanding in terms of what this technology
Yeah, and very critical. Very critical.
should be capable of. The reality is that even today we are not using those technologies in those areas.
Yeah, indeed.
Because it's still not mature enough to get there.
Correct.
But already 20 years ago, we started to use this technology in toys for children, which is, of course, in terms of what you potentially can do with the type of technology, a little bit of low-value thing. But with the maturity of that technology at that moment, it was just enough to get in such a toy, and it resulted in an added value for that toy. Meaning that we have to look to technology and product development not as consecutive processes, but let's say parallel processes with different timelines, and where we have to bridge from one to the other, where we have to inject intermediate results of technology development in certain applications.
Yes, indeed.
At the moment that it's mature enough for that application,
Yeah.
and when it creates added value for that application,
Yeah.
which are completely different. It's another logic, other criteria than what we are applying today.
And would your criticism be that we are maybe a little bit too dogmatic about this methodology? And would that be also maybe a policy advice to change that or to loosen up on that? Or to how can we open up this ecosystem for more innovation? I think that's the critical question.
Well, the whole problem is that we have been looking to the ecosystem through this lens of the TRL.
Yeah.
Starting from the idea that fundamental research that's in the university, and then we have applied research, and that's something that we do in the Fraunhofer's institutes, or in Belgium in IMEC, or whatever. And then we go even one step further, and we get, let's say, applied research centers on a sectorial level or whatever. So we really we structure the ecosystem in the logic of this TRL, while we should set up a much more open system where we have interactions between all those players on the different levels and throughout the complete journey.
Okay, Koen, let's come to the conclusion. When we look ahead, what would you say would be the most critical takeaways from the discussion that we have had that executives should take into account to prioritize how to meaningfully innovate into the future?
All right. Let's go for 5.
Yeah, okay.
That's easy. That's something we can count. First of all, make sure that in the beginning of your innovation process, your product development program, that you focus or that you define really well this value creation strategy.
Right.
And stick to it. I will give an example
Yes, please.
of that. Imagine that you are Ryanair, the airliner, who clearly had the strategy to disrupt,
Yeah.
to come with a product which is in terms of performance a very poor product, but for also a very low price.
Yes.
Of course, if you start developing that product or that service, then it can be very tempting to take all the opportunities that you see to increase a little bit the performance of that service, and to get it into the process. Of course, in reality, whether you want it or not, you also will increase the disadvantages related
cost.
to that, in this case, cost.
Yeah, indeed.
And at the end of the day, you get stuck in the middle. And that's the reason why I'm saying make sure that you keep focused on this initial strategy and get that sharp.
Yeah, yeah.
The second takeaway I suggest is to organize your development process in a gated way, and to have at each gate a clear evaluation of the added value of your product at that moment in time. And of course, specifications is an aspect of it, but the real truth is about, is there an added value? Is there the right balance between the advantages and the disadvantages? The third element, I think, should be make sure that you build multidisciplinary teams.
Yeah.
And from a cultural perspective, make sure that within those multidisciplinary teams, there's a real equality amongst the team members. Because that's the only way to make sure that there's also an equality between the disciplines.
Yeah,
and
indeed.
not one of those disciplines is really steering the process.
Yeah.
A fourth element about that notion of regulation.
Yeah.
And have a clear view on what's happening in terms of regulation. And I can guarantee you there's a lot happening
Of course.
in Europe in terms of regulation, and look at it from an opportunity perspective early in the process and not at the end as a compliancy issue.
Indeed. Makes sense.
And last but not least, make sure that you act in an ecosystem of technology providers, product owners, market owners in areas which are a little bit outside your scope. Make sure that you do not only have a view on technology development that is focused or that has, let's say, your space as their lead application, but also have a look on technologies that are in fact designed for something completely different, but see how you can how it can contribute to your value creation process.
So that would be more the cross-sector, the openness, and to really see how completely other technology could actually really increase your value proposition going forward.
Exactly. It's really about technology transfer. It's about dual use. It's about connecting worlds, connecting the dots. So I think if we take into account those five elements, then we probably already have a tough agenda.
Very interesting. No, thank you very much. That was very, very insightful. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Koen Verhaert.
My pleasure.